Hello, everyone. This is John Reed from Seattle, an unusual conference location and something of a surprised guest, though a regular on the program. Josh, how you doing?
I'm great. How are you doing?
Josh Greenbaum's here. Somewhere, Brian Sommer is saying, "What the hell?" Brian,
Could
wish you
have
were
been
here,
Brian.
man.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Okay.
so Brian and I always do the traditional Acumatica wrap, but the thing is, Brian got jammed by the weather, so Brian's not here. But I think I probably will do something with Brian at some point. But anyhow, that's it. That's a topic for another time. At the moment, we have Josh, and I'm really glad to have you here. And basically, the situation is that we are on the second full day, and we are on the clock because there's a rehearsal coming up in the room we've commandeered. So, Josh, we got to pack all our insights into just under 40 minutes.
All right.
I think we can do this, though.
I'm ready.
I think we can do this. So there's obviously so much to say about what we've heard. I honestly don't even know exactly where to begin. We've had a ton of meetings, a couple of keynotes, interactions with executives and customers. Where do you want to tee off?
Well, I want to tee off by saying I love this conference. I love the Acumatica conference because this is the pulse of the real economy to me. We go to other vendors' conferences, the ones that sell to the global, the global 100, the global 1000, and you hear the state of the global economy. But you come here and you get Main Street. Literally Main Street. I literally just had a meeting with someone whose shop is on Main Street in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and you get that pulse. It's a very sensitive and very real pulse of what's really happening. What's interesting about that pulse, and I'll share this. We want to take a macro step out. Is I shared with you when I first got here a bunch of economic data, macro data. On the economy, particularly relating to SMBs, and there was a surprising amount of optimism there. Surprising because they've been buffeted, they've been slammed by tariffs, by uncertainty, by the usual problems of hiring people, of finding great ways to get around some of the restrictions that the Trump administration have put in terms of access to markets. And yet there's the economists are saying there's a general sense of optimism. And honestly, I kind of felt that here. Now that may be self-selecting because folks who show up here are here to get the job done. But I think that optimism played out a bit in this show. So I feel like here I am looking at the face of the real economy, the Main Street economy in the United States, and I'm seeing a sense of optimism and a sense of looking forward to the future, which I'm happy to see because there's enough doom and gloom out there to fill 10 podcasts if we wanted to go there.
Yeah, and I kind of had to get on my game because I got on a podcast or two where I was sort of in the position of saying like what makes Acumatica great, and I got a little bit grouchy because that's not really how I see my job in this industry. The thing is that I want to call him like I see him, and I'm critical of pretty much every vendor because I feel like that's what I'm supposed to do. There's plenty of people to say how great things are about the economy or about AI or about a vendor in particular. But having said that, over the years following Acumatica, I have seen a number of things that I think do differentiate this vendor and at least make it a vendor that I take seriously and look to. One thing I will tell you, Josh, is I would have liked to see in the keynotes a little more of an acknowledgement of the realities small businesses are facing today. And granted, that can go both ways. When we were talking with John Case, he talked about how the impact of tariffs, for example, sometimes there's also opportunities to be found in disrupted market conditions. And so sometimes actually, customers are able to say, how can we move on this and use this and work within that scheme somehow by changing our suppliers or offering a different service or so great. But I would have liked to see a little bit more of a real world vibe. Right. But also we should note that this is the first time that Acumatica has had a conference in Seattle. And that's kind of a big deal for them because they're based here. And so I think, you can say whether you liked or didn't like this location. There's some things I really liked about it, but it's a big milestone for them. Yeah. And in the background, we have John Case, who's, kind of got his definite sea legs as the CEO of this company. Then we have a big transition with Ollie Johnny, moving on from Chief Product Officer. But from what I can tell, like Acumatica is doing really well. In the discussion that we had, John Case said that this was a record year for growth and a record year in terms of profitability. So they're doing something that's resonating with small business customers in this economy. So I guess my question for you is, what do you think that is?
Well, yeah, and I want to, for the record, saying I love this conference. That doesn't mean I'm going to, salute everything they're doing. I've got a few criticisms here and there, but why, look, at the end of the day, every company faces 5 basic issues. They've got to, we've got to solve 5 basic problems. They got to get the stuff they need to make the stuff they sell. They got to, so to get the stuff, make the stuff, get it to the customers without killing the margins, finding people to do steps 1 through 3, and then along the way, hopefully measuring it, reporting it, planning it, doing those, that's the basics. And what's fascinating is to come here and see how fundamental those basics are. And that's where I'll say the criticism, if you will. I think there was you just can't get away from AI. And you know me, I'm crankier than most about it.
Oh yeah.
So, I think to a certain extent that kept getting in the way of, getting these 4 basic problems solved. But people are here because they need to solve these problems. Because at the end of the day, particularly if you're a small, medium-sized company, you're up against all kinds of big global giants, whether you're in retail, whether you're in manufacturing, whether you're in construction, and you have to be as nimble as them or better in order to succeed. You and I have talked about this in the retail space, right? If you're going to succeed as a retailer, you've got to be able to duke it out with the big box guys in the online world and be successful. Well, folks come here because if you're in retail, that's what you want to be able to do too. And it's maybe as simple as Shopify integration or some of the new things we saw in terms of Amazon Marketplace integration. But you've got to be able to keep alive by looking bigger, by punching above your weight in your market. I think that's what people come here to do, is to learn how to punch above their weight.
So there's many different kinds of AI to talk about, and the kind that gets the emphasis at these shows tends to be of the agentic variety, or the generative AI assistants, which Acumatica talked a fair amount about. And for Acumatica customers, this is on the way. They confirm that they're in the next release called R1, coming out fairly soon. They're going to have access to the so-called assistant, which is embedded in all these scenarios. They're going to find out for themselves, but that's more of a playground, and then the general availability will be in the fall in release 2. But what I would argue is that the real value being provided for customers right now is multifaceted, and that type of tech is just a potentially small component of all of it. And again, talking to customers the last couple of days, I heard things about benefits from single source of the truth, a different level of visibility, traceability within their systems. The workflow session I attended was wall to wall, had nothing to do with AI. It was all about configuring all kinds of synchronous and asynchronous processes. And I think the really potent thing for me is, I think this is about competing in industry in new ways, as you referred to with retail. And Acumatica often in the last year has played up AI over its verticals, though they do intersect. But I think it's really about the industry cloud type of thing, and really learning how to compete as a smaller player in industries that are cutthroat, and where you're looking for the advantage you can have when, like you said, the Amazons and Walmarts, for better and often for worse, have these economies of scale that leave you out. And what I find fascinating about Acumatica customers is how they do that. And again, I hear these stories of how they changed and rolled out different business models within the context of Acumatica. And to me, that's what I would want to be singing about on stage. I understand why the AI, you have to say we've got AI and all of that. I get that. But to me, if I wanted to say what really impressed me, it was when I was talking with a customer earlier today about their really small company, but complex processes, a complex mix of businesses and services and automotive. And so I got to the gut check question, which is, when you had to add your new service lines and your new products, because almost every product is a new one, like did you have to, build something? What did you do? Did you have to go back to your partner? Their partner's heavily involved, but they're like, No, it was all configurable within Acumatica. We haven't run into a wall yet with that. And I was like, that's really cool. I don't hear that very often. And to me, that's what leaves a lasting impression on me.
Right. And that is, I think that's a true measure of success if you're a vendor, is if your customers' business expands within the context of the technology platform you provide.
Yep.
And it's seamless. So I'll give you a great example of that as well. Speaking to one of the customers yesterday, they wanted to go into a new line of business for them, selling into automotive dealer networks. Guess how you interface with an automotive dealer network? EDI. So dial back dial back to the last century in terms of a technology standard, but guess what? There's a partner with an EDI interface that plugs right into Acumatica's open API. Bingo. They're in business. They're running a new line of business off of Acumatica. They've got the partner thing. They got so that's the story. I agree. That's the story that gives you goosebumps if you're nerdy like us, you've been around too long.
Yeah, because we've heard these stories again and again at shows, and we're always digging for these exceptional moments. And I just heard a lot of those from customers. And granted, a lot of them also said that they feel like they're just scratching the surface of what they can do.
Yeah.
But I love hearing those stories. And to me, the good news for them, and we could get into this a little further, is what they're doing with the data and process discipline of getting onto a modern ERP solution is in fact the precursor to better AI and better decision-making and better analytics and all of that shit. And that's what's so fundamentally wrong about a lot of the AI evangelism right now, is trying to claim that these so-called systems of record are no longer relevant. And when I got into the last argument about this on LinkedIn, one of the things I said is, there is no system of record anymore. I mean, obviously the systems of record and the deterministic processes are important, but you won't find a single friggin' vendor in this entire marketplace that says we're a system of record. Every single vendor is pushing to provide more value than that. They understand that a transactional system isn't enough. But like Ali Johnny told us today, he was drawn to Acumatica because they were trying to build a platform. And it turns out that building a platform is really robust right now, because you can build and extend, and you can pull data out, you can manipulate it. And as per the so-called Bill of Rights, which only 2 vendors actually have right now, the customers own their data, right? And so we don't hear any of these data toll road stories that are really making me
that was
throw
me
up.
gagging.
I know.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, exactly. Because you own your data. So, to me, that is like actually the proper journey for customers to be on. And study after study is showing that the customers that try to skip that and go directly to some kind of fancy, sexy, generative agentic solution without that homework are falling on their faces.
Well, they by definition will. I mean, if I look at 2 of the most essential themes that came out of this from the basic blocking of tackling of how does a customer become successful using Acumatica software, or any software, but we're here at Acumatica, so it's their software. It's about data quality, integrity, and change management. Getting those things right is everything, and nothing happens without that. And what was nice about a lot of the conversations I had, and actually if you sort of read between the lines of a lot of what we heard on keynote stage today, and to a lesser extent, but still yesterday, is these are really, really fundamental to the Acumatica story as well. As much as they play the game because they have to, AI, at the end of the day, they're talking about data quality, data integrity. They're talking about what happens when you're on a single platform of truth and what that means. Independent of whether you can do your, your amazing AI stuff, you can do the basics of blocking and tackling in a way that you wouldn't be able to do otherwise. You can't do otherwise. We were in a session together, and I was in a couple others where, the question of what do we do with old data came up. And there was one of the partners today said, 2 years. I'll migrate 2 years of your data, and if you need more than 2 years, let's talk about it, because you're going to start over. It's a fresh start, and it's a clean start, and from that foundation of being on Acumatica, you can do amazing things.
So I'm probably going to tape something with Brian tomorrow, because I don't like that Brian didn't get to be here. So I want to avoid repeating myself. So I want to ask you a bit more about what you found on the ground. So can you just tell us, like, what were you kind of thinking going into the show, and what are a couple of standout things that you learned that we haven't talked about?
Well, again, I was thinking that, like I said, this is sort of the pulse of the American economy show. I love meeting these small and mid-sized companies and really feeling their pain. One of the things that really surprised me about the customers I talked to, the mature customers, and that's typically who we got. I don't know about you, but the folks I talked to have been around the block with Acumatica for several years. They're doing a really good job, implementing the software. The thing that really struck me is this: there's still a big hole in the productivity and automation story, and that's because operations isn't part of the equation. Operations, and this has sort of been a revelation that I walked in the door not realizing how powerful it was, and walking out of the door going, this is really big, and is going to be the next big question, I think, in the ERP space, because at the end of the day, the best way to characterize it is that IT, finance, and ERP all grew up together in the last 35 years. And those people literally went to the same schools, took the same classes, and live and breathe, this world that we live in. You and I have been our entire careers. Operations is a completely different beast. Operations is still often in a completely different world. The average age of your operations, your people on your shop floor is 10 to 20 years more than the average age of the people in IT or finance. The average age of your equipment is measured in decades, not years, which is what you have in IT. So this divide is now going to start knocking on the door it's been there for a while, but I heard it everywhere I looked in this last 2 days, is I need to get a better hold of my operations information, my operations data, in order to complete the process, in order to square the the circle, in order to get it right. And we saw a little operations nod this morning in the new product for shop floor management. There's Glenn. Glenn only wants a couple buttons to push, but he's become important, because if you're not managing Glenn, you're not managing the full picture. So that was my other kind of revelation coming away from here, is that we've got an interesting challenge to get to that next level of efficiency and productivity. And it's going to be bringing operations into the fold.
Yeah, exactly. And, I think there's progress being made on sort of into the operations in terms of getting that equipment like to the point where it can actually create signals you can understand and use. And like you said, the culture of adapting to embracing that, you want that to be visible inside your organization. And how does that change? And that's a process. But there are some partners on the show floor that I talk to that are working on things like real-time production scheduling and updating folks' MES systems and things like that. And you're not, until you do that stuff, you're not, there's no AI, like nothing meaningful there. One of the CEOs I talked with from a company called Tech Electronics, I was so impressed with the change.
Yeah.
I was so impressed with the change management stuff. And he was on a panel you and I were at as well. But I really liked how he was able to kind of fuse the themes of tech, data modernization, but also culture and change. And I think part of the reason I liked it is that lately there's been so much talk around these AI first mandates that feel like imposing tools on workers. And I just really hate that, especially because a lot of these tools are potentially heavy on the surveillance aspects because of all the digital exhaust they inhale. And to kind of force workers to essentially be monitored, to me, is just gross. And on the other hand, what worker doesn't want to have a chance to experiment in a safe setting with things that can help them? And I just feel like if the tools are good, you don't have to force them. People will use them. And what Menace talked about, he talked about like a couple of really cool things. Like, he said that the employees all feel so involved in the transformation. And I was like, I don't hear that very often. He said, he even said, like, they called it Project Twister because they said it was going to be a roller coaster. There were going to be ups and downs. And he said, next month is going to be a really hard, painful month. Like, but the employees just really understood that. And while this wasn't AI, this was Acumatica. They were all taking ownership in their lines of business of these like experimental sandboxes to play with the functionality and totally embrace that. And I'm just like, man, I mean, I wish I would hear more stories like that at the shows I go to, you know?
Well, you know, and I had a whole bunch of notes from what his participation in that panel we went to, because you know, you mentioned he called it Twister. I mean, he said that at the panel. You know, we put a lot of the word he used. We put a lot of adrenaline into the project, and that meant parties, recognitions, excitement, involvement. You know, at at the women's panel I went to later in the afternoon that you were there for part of, one of the people asked, how do I get away from, it's sort of a hard question to answer. It's a hard question to ask, but essentially she was asking, how do I get away from having to, you know, bullshit the men in my organization in order to get them to do the things they need to do? I'm the only woman trying to get this happening. And you know, one of the suggestions was, you know, you're going to have to really sit down with them and say, here's the, you know, pretend you have a magic wand. What would you like to do with your magic wand? And when they come up with the things that that they want to do that you're already doing, say, guess what? I'm going to give you that. I'm going to empower you. I'm going to make you, you know, more successful doing the things you want to do. That engagement that Manish was talking about is something that plays pretty broadly. It's never enough. That we never hear enough about it, and maybe that's the problem. It needs to be more front and center. That's why at the beginning of the, you know, this conversation, I said change management. That's really exciting to me every time I hear people talking about it.
Yeah, I want to get into the women in technology panel a little bit more, because I went to half of it before I had a conflict, but I found the candor, and I see this a lot in these kinds of women in technology events, the candor just so refreshing. Like the idea that you can have leaders on stage that admit their failings and their difficulties and what they're grappling with. Like, to me, that just creates the fodder for just better conversations, better projects, better culture. I find myself thinking, like, if you're going to relegate that to like, oh, that's a diversity event or something, that's just so silly. I mean, to me, it's the way we should all be communicating all the time. Like, to me, that is true leadership, to admit, like, look, like, you know, there were times where I felt shouted down, or there were times where I didn't know what to do.
Or I was bullied, or I was humiliated, or I was just passed over. Look, you and there were 4 men in that room when we walked in. There was only one at the end.
Yeah, you were there, yeah.
And every message in there was relevant to everybody in this conference.
Yep.
Now, it's of particular relevance to women because they're rolling that boulder uphill in a way that most men don't. So I don't want to take away that moment where they can get together and have that conversation without the bros interrupting or raising their hand. But you're absolutely right, and it's particularly poignant because it is so hard to roll that ball up the hill. If you're a woman, there, you know, and particularly think of the industries as, you know, Acumatica specializes in construction. You know, the major partner account manager is a woman for Acumatica. And, you know, she talked about that. I'm in construction.
Right.
Like, I got to do this, you know, it's the old line about Ginger Rogers. She has to dance as good as Fred Astaire backwards in heels.
Yeah.
You know, but at the end of the day, on the one hand, we need that conversation for women, I believe, amongst themselves. I'll take notes and you know, and applaud at the end. They have to have that conversation because they need a boost. They need this safety to boost themselves in a situation where they don't want to feel intimidated or ridiculed. But absolutely everything that was said in that room is relevant to everybody, 100%.
Yeah, and I think it's a thing where, you know, with these customers now, like, I think they are, you know, excited about some of the potentials of AI, but they're definitely at the point where they really need to understand better what this means from a skills perspective for their organizations, what's going to work for them, what's not. We were talking about earlier today about how in some regulated industries, there's still a whole lot of risk and I think proper questions about risk in those industries. And what it comes down to, I think, is that Acumatica's challenge is to maintain the trust with their customers that they don't have to try to build these elaborate data architectures themselves, that Acumatica is going to deliver that as part of the platform. And then the customers should be able to dictate what they want to adopt within that works for them. And as long as Acumatica honors that, I think that puts their customers in a good position. Now, the customers still have work because they can't get out of the data conversation. And we talked about that a lot. Like that came up almost more than anything else as far as like, what do you do about bad data? We found out our data wasn't good enough. We're still trying to figure out data governance. We're trying to incorporate other non-Acumatica solutions into all of that. So the customer still has to participate in that. But I think the customers, by and large, feel relieved that if they are on board with where Acumatica is going here, they don't have to, build these elaborate architectures. And, I could spend the rest of this podcast talking about the nuances of context engineering and the architectures that are required to feed these systems proper data. And, meanwhile, why do customers want to do that? Acumatica is building their own models. Customers can't do that. Acumatica has the ability to swap one LLM for another. Customers don't want to mess around with that. I almost said the F word. So the point is, like, I think that delivers well for where small businesses are at right now. But they don't want to see another, trick like Google or Microsoft plays where one day you log on, like I logged on to my Gmail workplace and it inserted all these ridiculous AI features that I don't want.
Right.
As if I don't know what's good for me. Like,
and then you have to play with it. Then you have to mess around with it to try to figure out how to make it go away.
And how to get rid of it. I've spent a lot of time getting rid of AI stuff, which is not to say that I don't like using certain AIs. I mean, you and I did a bunch of LLM stuff this fall, building the business case workshops.
Everyone's been harassing me about it because I enjoyed it too. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So it's not like we don't like the technology. It's just that we're trying to figure out where it really fits into our lives and enhances it. And
enhancing it is the key. And actually, I'll tell you the thing I like about it. So one bellwether of that, are you making my business better versus making me work harder to be where I am? Two of the folks I spoke to today, two of the customers, they're hiring a financial analyst. They want to unlock their data. They're not hiring IT people to program. They're hiring each one hiring a financial analyst because they want to be able to start really digging into this data. Now that they realize this single, pane of truth, whatever metaphor you want, is actually really functional, they want to get at it. And I think that's a really positive sort of endorsement of what Acumatica is doing in these companies. It's easy now. It's easy to get to where you can have this much more analytical view of your business. Go at it, and don't worry about the technology. We've got that covered.
Yeah, and it's interesting to think about like what is truly different about vendors and what's not, and why. There's challenges in some areas. Like, so for example, like, if an Acumatica, when Acumatica says, well, we listen to our customers, I think that's true, but then I struggle with that one because any vendor could say that. What does that mean? But like, for example, with what Acumatica is doing with Acumatica Labs is a nice proof point of that, where they're collaborating closely on AI features. So I'm always looking for like what really differentiates a vendor, and Acumatica has way more of those than most. I don't want to list them all out because it will sound like a sales pitch, but let me just run a few because I think these are important. Consumption-based pricing. Like, it's close. Acumatica's pricing is very close to consumption-based, and I think that's always been good for them. It's especially good right now for two reasons. One, it translates a lot better into how AI is used and built. So that's huge. But also, customers right now in volatile economies are having a lot of ups and downs. The ability to have that consumption where you're not tied to user seat license is really, really helpful for flexible market conditions. So that's one thing.
Love it.
Number two, the customer bill of rights. Only 2 vendors in the entire industry have that. And also the principles of innovation around responsible AI development. Now, granted, these are words you have to then live by, but they also present accountability.
Right.
And so, for example, with the customer bill of rights, I saw some stuff online of a couple customers saying, hey, you did some pricing things that didn't line up with the bill. The point is, when you put it out there, you're creating a level of accountability for yourself. And I'll add one more for now, which is tying a hackathon into your business conference. And my only criticism of Acumatica with some of these differentiators is I don't think they make enough noise about them, and that's one thing I kind of miss about the Acumatica of 5 years ago, because 5 years ago, Acumatica would go on stage and kind of be a little more like, yeah, we're so different than and they would call out the big vendors and be like, and I think a little more of that sort of punky energy would be cool to see on stage. But so in the case of a hackathon, like you had 13 customers compete and they all built really interesting stuff. I think only a few of them coded at all. And the winner didn't code. And I'd personally like to see that flow right into the keynote next year and say, just do a lightning round, 1 minute of the top 3 and what they built in a day or a weekend or whatever, because I think that's really powerful. And how many business user conferences have hackathons? I mean, not very many. And
not anymore. And
And more and more, like bringing all that together is so important. Bringing the business, the developers, the technology, let's all sit around a table. And so I love that. And like I said, if anything, I wish they'd make more noise about that stuff.
Yeah. And it was a cool app that won. It was a field service app that translated on the fly from Spanish to English and back, and did the job. Used AI, that thing I keep disparaging, but simple, sweet, easy to use, functional, something somebody wants to use.
Yeah. And maybe build it out further from there. So there you go.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk. We have to wrap in just a few. Let's talk briefly about any challenges. One challenge that I think will be potent for Acumatica is getting their partners and to an extent their customers as well, like helping them with all the transitions that are happening economically, technology-wise, and otherwise. And, a lot of their partners specialize in, serving specific kinds of customers with point solutions or specific, approaches to Acumatica for industry or whatever. Like, they need a big picture of where this is all headed. And they, the leadership talk with us about that. Stuff is in motion. But I do think that this is the biggest. Acumatica has a relatively healthy partner community compared to most of those that we see in the ERP world, for sure. But I do think this does pose new challenges for Acumatica as far as that process of change. Like, everyone's got to change. That's just the world we live in.
And yet, I mean, this is interesting. So, there is definitely a tension I'm feeling in conversations with customers. Not everyone's moving to the latest rev. People are a couple of revs behind. And they're not, there's a lot that's postulated on being on the latest rev. That's what vendors do best. And, that's, I think there's always going to be that tension, but I felt like that was not necessarily addressed as well as it could have been in terms of why you need to be on the newest version. And you sort of want to find out, you want the positive sale, not the negative, oh, I can't do that cool thing. Oh, I wish I could have. But I think there's that tension's there. I think that, you're absolutely right. I mean, the partners seem to be really, in general, solid and better taking care of them. Some vendor ecosystems we know, but this has always the trick. Partner programs are the hardest thing to manage in the whole industry, I think, bar none, because you need so many different kinds of partners. They are often, like, for smaller companies like Acumatica, small companies themselves. It's tricky. That's a good one.
So you're one of the biggest agentic AI critics, I would say, amongst the analyst contingent. So given that Acumatica is pushing their intelligence systems and they are releasing agentic and generative stuff next year and emphasizing that, How would you suggest that Acumatica talk about that in the context of their overall strategy for customers?
I sort of feel like everybody should be doing this, not just Acumatica, is really differentiate between the AI that's already there working for them today and the agentic, the new stuff, because I think it's really important to set expectations. New stuff is new. It's going to take a little, it's going to take a little time to sort out. I think John Pollock, the new CPO, kind of put that finally on stage during his keynote time, where he actually looked at this sort of the evolution of what they want to do with AI, and building up towards a trust model, which I think is really good, and doing it stepwise. Because I think what we're seeing with agentic, we're just seeing too many promises that are going to get broken in the process of fixing a nascent technology. That's how it works. Meanwhile, some of the basic bottom line stuff that AI is already doing. You look at a field service app and you see that map there. There's AI directing that agent that field service tech to the right place at the right time. That there's all kinds of things with reconciling invoices, reconciliation in general. Anomaly detection doesn't need agentic LLM-based AI to do a really good job. I think they should differentiate and make it clear what is the cool new stuff that you're going to have to, handle a little more carefully, and what's the robust stuff that you can get in there and really swing for the the hills with.
All right. Well, we're almost out of time because we may get kicked out of this room. So what do you think Acumatica needs to do in 2026 to have a successful year?
I would like to, I think they need to really keep emphasizing this value proposition, that they are really helping these customers be successful in these times of chaos and complexity, and get that part right and make it as solid as possible. Because that's really what they're doing. These customers coming in here, based on that economic data we talked about, want to be optimistic. They want to know that they've got some hard times ahead, but they've got the vendor that's got their back. And that is not about taking a flyer on some net new technology. It's about, how do we help you get the job done today and tomorrow, get you through this year, get you through next year, get you through the next year. That's what these small businesses have to think of. So match the planning window of the partners, of the customers, with this pragmatic sense of, here's what we can do for you today and tomorrow.
Works for me. I think I'll just add that transparency and education are the areas where vendors can really, I think, succeed this year in earning some of that trust, and not selling AI so much, but focusing on transparency and education. And that's what I'm going to hope Acumatica emphasizes as well this year. And I would add that when at the keynote stage, at some point they asked, how many folks are using Chat GPT and Gemini or whatever. And I think the hope was to see some excitement from the crowd. The response was pretty tepid, let's be honest.
Yep.
And I would like Acumatica to spend more time saying, I understand what they're doing there, because they're saying that that our tools are going to be as easy to use as you find these tools to use. And look, the strength of these tools is that they're easy to use. The downside is that a lot of the information they surface to your queries is not correct. And, Google just had to pull back a bunch of Google Health stuff as a result of that, for example. And, so these vendors are going out and providing, content that is really critical to our lives, and the content's not being surfaced accurately. And I would like to see Acumatica position against that, instead of saying, welcome to the party, to kind of say more like, actually, this is a whole different thing.
Right.
Like what your experience is there. And I had a couple customers say we're worried about that, because I had some bad stuff come out of my personal interactions, like stuff that wasn't right.
Yeah.
And I'd like to see Acumatica say, we're going to do it the right way. And they do say that, to be fair. They said that plenty of times in our discussions, but I'd like to see that be more of the keynote emphasis as well, and more of the overall messaging emphasis.
Look, automation is a really good proxy for a lot of what AI can do.
Yeah.
And customers want things automated. That is a no-brainer, and it really helps. So why not use that term as appropriate? There are different levels of automation you're going to get. And, not all of them are at the peak pinnacle of AI, the forefront of AI. Some of them are automating the stuff you need done now in a perfectly usable way.
To me, the winning message is to say to each customer, you're going to have a range of options for how you automate and interact with our systems. And to the best of our ability, we're going to allow you to do that at your own pace, the way you want it, and not be imposed on you where one day you wake up and see interface has been replaced by this interface, like I do with these big providers now, right?
Or that you've started down a road it was premature.
Microsoft did this to me the other day where I loaded up the Edge browser and it said, we've automatically opted you into all this syncing and logging in across devices and stuff. And I didn't want it, and it's like,
don't get me started on Edge. They upgraded Edge and it is, and I'm back to Firefox.
I'm constantly opting out of stuff. And my point with a company like Acumatica is give every customer granular controls. So in other words, they're talking about these phases of autonomous trust, but I would encourage them to think of it not just in terms of timelines overall for everyone, but that every customer in every industry, let them proceed at their own pace to the best of your abilities, right? While obviously keeping them on, new releases to the most part, like the newest you can, but like don't let them fall way behind or anything. But the point is, let them dictate the pace of adoption. I think you're going to do a lot better.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I would love that. I would love that for every vendor, but
all right.
Let's start with Acumatica.
Well, I think we're going to lose a lot of those battles this year, Josh, but maybe
we'll win
maybe this one will get it right.
There we go.
Anyway, to be continued, more podcasts to follow. Thank you, Josh, for joining.
My pleasure. Thanks for letting me replace Brian. Sorry, Brian, but
shout out to Brian, but we'll get you soon.
We'll get you.